What if I told you that Ilhan Omar just repeated the exact mistake that has destroyed every republic in history? What if her recent advice to Somali immigrants about immigration enforcement isn't just bad politics, but a textbook example of the divided loyalty that brought down Athens, Rome, and every other democracy that forgot this ancient lesson? You cannot serve two masters. This isn't morality. It's political science. It's a law as immutable as gravity. And Congressman Omar just discovered it the hard way. The hard way, just discovered it, the hard way. In Polder bring my clear, when for 30 years, I've studied how republics rise and fall. The rise and fall at Crasby courts of the Kabul, the Monby of the one Polder bring, in fall at Crasby courts of the Kabul. For 30 years, the right do know it dirty soul te. The right do know it, the hard way, the right do know it hoso one people buffy handle something immortalized pokal. The pattern is always the same. A politician tries to maintain loyalty to two different groups, with conflicting interests. They think they can balance both, satisfy everyone, keep all their supporters happy. They're always wrong, and the ending is always the same. Political isolation, loss of trust, and career destruction. Omar's recent statements to Somali voters about how to handle immigration enforcement aren't just controversial. They're a perfect example of what political theorists call divided loyalty, the phenomenon that has destroyed more republics than war, plague, or economic collapse combined. Let me show you why this ends only one way, with Omar's political career in ruins, and her influence completely gone. The moment Omar gave advice to Somali immigrants about resisting federal immigration enforcement, she crossed a line that no successful politician in American history has ever crossed and survived. She chose ethnic loyalty over national loyalty. She placed the interests of one community above the laws and institutions of the republic she swore to serve. This isn't about immigration policy. This isn't about whether you like or dislike immigration enforcement. This is about something far more fundamental. Whether a representative in Congress represents America or represents a foreign ethnic community that happens to live in America. Omar made her choice clear, and history tells us exactly what happens next. Think of it this way. Imagine trying to use one water pump to irrigate two fields that lie in opposite directions. No matter how hard you work that pump, you cannot send water to both places simultaneously. The system breaks down, one field gets watered while the other dies. Or more likely, both fields get inadequate water and both crops fail. Political loyalty works the same way. You cannot simultaneously serve the interests of Somalia and America when those interests conflict. You cannot represent both Somali immigrants and American citizens when their priorities diverge. You cannot be both a Somali activist and an American legislator when federal law enforcement conflicts with ethnic solidarity. Omar thought she could do all of this. She was wrong. And history gives us the perfect examples of what happens to politicians who make this mistake. Let me tell you about Alcibiades, the most famous example of divided loyalty in ancient history. This Athenian general was brilliant, charismatic, and politically gifted. He could have been one of history's greatest leaders. Instead, he became a cautionary tale that every student of politics learns. Also started as a loyal Athenian, fighting for democracy against Sparta. But when Athenian politics turned against him, he fled to Sparta and began advising Athens' greatest enemies. He helped Sparta defeat Athens in multiple battles, using his inside knowledge of Athenian strategy. But then Spartan politics shifted, and Alcibiades found himself unwelcome there too. So he fled again, this time to Persia, offering his services to the Persian Empire against both Athens and Sparta. Do you see the pattern? Each time Alcibiades switched sides, he gained temporary safety, but lost long-term trust. Eventually, nobody trusted him anywhere. The Athenians saw him as a traitor. The Spartans knew he would betray them if circumstances changed. The Persians understood he had no permanent loyalties. Alcibiades died in exile, assassinated by people who no longer believed anything he said. His brilliance couldn't save him from the fundamental law of politics. Divided loyalty destroys trust in politics. Without trust is impossible. Omar is following the exact same path. She built her political career on ethnic identity rather than American civic identity. She was celebrated as the first Somali American in Congress, not as an American who happened to be born in Somalia. That distinction matters more than most people realize. By accepting the ethnic identity label, Omar trapped herself in a political box. She became the representative of Somali in America, rather than an American representative who serves all constituents equally And now, when American law conflicts with Somali community interests, she faces the same impossible choice that destroyed Alcibiades. Consider what happened to Alaric, the Visigoth general who served Rome. Here was a man granted Roman citizenship and high military rank. We commanded Roman legions and fought for Roman interests across the empire. Rome offered him integration, status, and power. But when political winds shifted and Rome no longer needed his services as much, Alaric remembered his tribal loyalties. In 410 CE, he led his Visigoth forces in sacking Rome itself, destroying the very city that had elevated him to prominence. The lesson is clear. Legal citizenship means nothing without genuine loyalty. You can change someone's papers, but you cannot forcibly change their heart. And when crisis comes, divided hearts choose sides. Rome learned too late that diverse armies held together only by money and legal documents fall apart when those incentives disappear. The Roman legions that conquered the Mediterranean were composed of Roman citizens who shared a common identity and common loyalty. The later Roman armies filled with foreign mercenaries like Alaric collapsed the moment their pay was delayed or their ethnic interests conflicted with Roman interests. America is repeating Rome's mistake. We've created a system where ethnic identity competes with civic identity, where politicians can build entire careers representing foreign communities rather than American interests. Omar's trajectory was predictable from the moment she entered politics. She rose to prominence by emphasizing her identity as a refugee, a Muslim, a Somali. She became a symbol of diversity rather than a symbol of American civic virtue. This strategy worked temporarily because it aligned with elite progressive preferences for multicultural representation, but it contained the seeds of its own destruction. Because when you build your political brand on ethnic identity, you become trapped by that identity. You cannot evolve, adapt, or broaden your appeal when political circumstances change. Now that immigration has become a central political issue again, Omar faces her Alcibiades moment. She can either serve American law and institutions even when they conflict with Somali community preferences, or she can serve Somali ethnic interests even when they conflict with American legal authority. She chose ethnic loyalty. That choice will define the rest of her political career. Here's in level file the rest of her political career. What happens next, based on historical precedent. First, immigration enforcement will intensify regardless of Omar's advice. Federal immigration law doesn't change because one Congress member objects to it. If anything, her resistance will accelerate enforcement as other politicians distance themselves from her position. Second, Omar will face an impossible political choice in every subsequent immigration vote: support enforcement and lose her Somali base, oppose enforcement and lose mainstream American voters. There's no middle ground because the interests of those two groups fundamentally conflict. Third, other Democratic politicians will gradually distance themselves from Omar. They understand that being associated with divided loyalty is political death in American politics. Progressive politicians might agree with Omar's immigration positions, but they won't defend her method of ethnic organizing because it threatens their own careers. Fourth, Omar will become increasingly isolated within Congress. Political effectiveness requires trust and cooperation from colleagues. Once you're labeled as someone with divided loyalty, that trust evaporates. Other members wonder whether you're representing America or representing Somalia when you vote on foreign policy, defense spending, or international trade. This isolation creates a downward spiral. As Omar loses influence within mainstream politics, she'll become even more dependent on ethnic identity politics to maintain relevance. But ethnic politics is a shrinking strategy in American democracy. It works only as long as ethnic communities remain politically unified, and only as long as mainstream politicians need ethnic votes. When political winds shift, ethnic politicians become expendable quickly because they cannot broaden their coalition. They're trapped in demographic categories that limit their appeal. The broader pattern here extends far beyond Omar's individual career. America itself is facing a crisis of divided loyalty that mirrors the challenges that destroyed every previous republic in history. Our founders understood this danger. They created a system designed to forge a common American identity that would supersede ethnic, regional, and religious divisions. The motto pluribus unum, out of many one, wasn't just inspiring rhetoric. It was a practical political necessity. For most of American history, this system worked. Immigrants arrived from different countries, but they became Americans. They learned English, adopted American civic values, and developed primary loyalty to American institutions rather than to their ethnic origins. This didn't mean erasing cultural heritage, but it did mean establishing clear priority when conflicts arose. When America went to war with Germany, German Americans fought for America. When America had trade disputes with Ireland, Irish Amin supported American interests. When immigration law conflicted with ethnic preferences, ethnic politicians supported American law. That consensus has completely broken down over the past 30 years. We now celebrate ethnic identity over civic identity. We encourage politicians to represent ethnic communities rather than geographic constituencies. We've created a system where divided loyalty isn't just tolerated, it's encouraged. Omar represents the logical conclusion of this transformation. She's not an aberration. She's the inevitable result of identity politics taken to its conclusion. But history shows us that republics cannot survive this kind of fragmentation. When citizens owe primary little, hava doriwajanen, for not count bear, what doing comrade nof. But jen esverden, verden bed not perintend that token tornix bed neared. Loyalty to ethnic groups rather than to common civic institutions. The republic ceases to function as a republic. It becomes what Aristotle called a mere alliance, a temporary arrangement between competing groups that dissolves when interests diverge. Aristotle warned that true cities require citizens who share common understanding of justice and the good life. When that shared understanding disappears, when people cannot agree on fundamental questions of law and loyalty, the political system becomes unstable. This is happening in America right now. We no longer agree on basic questions. Should immigration law be enforced? Do American citizens have priority over foreign nationals? Should politicians represent ethnic communities or geographic constituencies? Are American institutions legitimate or systemically oppressive? Without shared answers to these questions, we don't have a republic. We have competing factions held together temporarily by economic convenience and mutual fear. Omar's mistake illuminates this broader crisis. Her divided loyalty isn't unique. It's typical of our current political class. The difference is that her ethnic organizing is more visible and more explicit than most. But the pattern is everywhere. Politicians who prioritize gender identity over civic duty. Legislators who serve corporate donors rather than voters. Representatives who advance ideological agendas rather than constitutional governance. All of these represent forms of divided loyalty that weaken Republican institutions and undermine public trust in democratic governance. The solution isn't to demonize Omar personally. The solution is to recognize that our political system has created incentives that reward divided loyalty over civic virtue. Until those incentives change, we'll continue producing politicians like Omar who face impossible choices between competing loyalties. Historical precedent tells us how this story ends. Republics that cannot command primary loyalty from their citizens don't survive as republics. They either transform into empires held together by force, or they fragment into smaller political units, organized around ethnic and regional identities. America stands at that crossroads right now. Omar's career will serve as a test case for whether divided loyalty can succeed in American politics, or whether our system still retains enough civic virtue to reject politicians who serve ethnic interests over national interests. Based on everything I know about Republican government and historical precedent, Omar's political career is finished. She may hold her seat for a few more terms through ethnic solidarity, but her influence within American politics will steadily decline until she becomes a marginal figure representing a narrow community rather than a national leader representing American interests. That outcome might seem harsh, but it's necessary for Republican survival. Republics that tolerate divided loyalty cease to be republics. The ancient lesson remains true. You cannot serve two masters and survive in politics. Omar learned this lesson too late.